Hey guys, Joe Sidoti here. You know, I wanted to talk for a little bit about the difference between analog and digital. What are the pros, what are the cons, you know? Some people just swear by recording analog and they can't live without their outboard gear. And some people, they are just totally fine with being in the box, staying all digital. And I just kind of wanted to just have a conversation about that and just to kind of throw out some thoughts and some ideas. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you're not already, and leave a like and comment something. It really helps the channel. But with that being said, let's start talking about analog versus digital. So, you know, I listen to a lot of music. I mean, music is one of my passions, and I always find myself listening to older stuff recorded in the 70s and the 80s and even in the early 90s. And the recordings just sound so good. And I'm like, man, you know, even back in the day when I was just starting out, you know, in the early 90s as an audio engineer, there was very little digital going on. There was ADATs, there was like a fancy Sony machine, and then there was like, you know, Tascam DA88s and 38s, things like that, you know, tape-based digital. But there was no computer recording yet, you know, no DAWs. And so it was just kind of a thing that everyone just knew if you recorded analog, it was going to sound better than digital. Digital just hadn't gotten there yet. But if you fast forward to today, digital is like really a viable option. Converters have gotten great. Computers are fast. You're not really worried about can your computer keep up, and you've got just endless track counts, etc., etc. So what are some of the pros and the cons for analog versus digital? Let's just talk about them. I think one pro for analog is it really does sound better naturally because of compression, tape compression, and being able to slam something into that signal, and it just has distortion, pleasing distortion, that now today's digital representations of analog gear are replicating that distortion because we're all in agreement. Our brains tell us we like that. That sounds good. I would say a pro for digital would be that you can be as creative as you want. You can add another track and another track, and you can just keep on doing take after take and just get stacks of vocals and electric guitars. And you can put a mic on every drum, top, bottom, 3 different sets of room mics. It doesn't matter. You can just record as much as you want. I mean, providing that you've got the I/O to handle that many inputs at one time. But I think that also can be a con for digital. So back in the day, you had, you know, if you were recording to 2-inch tape, you had 24 tracks. And that's all you had to work with. So you had to make decisions. You know, what's the priority? Do we need a lot of vocals? Well, then you're probably gonna have only 3 or 4 drum tracks because you need all the extra tracks for vocals. Or maybe it's all about the rock band, so you have 1 or 2 tracks for vocals and that's it. But you had to make those decisions, and I think that that's why that can be a con for digital, is you just never get to a point where you commit and you say, this is all that this song needs. Now, I'm not saying, you know, to just be happy with okay, and there's other videos that I have that talk about that, but I'm saying sometimes you can be overstimulated with too many tracks. So that's one of the pros and the cons as far as track count. So we've talked about saturation, talked about track count. Here's one that I think that a lot of people who aren't familiar with analog recording don't realize, and that is the ear fatigue. See, when you've got a recording in a DAW on a computer, you can press that space bar and just keep the song looping endlessly, never having an ear break. Versus, say, when you're on a tape machine, even back in the day, even with digital, you had to press stop, and you had to rewind, and you had to make cue marks. And so that time was a chance for your ears to kind of come back down, and then, are you ready? Everyone ready? Okay, go. And so I would say that's a pro for analog, and a con for digital is just the ability to just endlessly play music, and it just never ending, and you never get an ear break. A lot of young engineers who are just getting started out, they kind of just dive deep into the plugin world, and they just get consumed by it. And there's all these crazy UIs with all these weird knobs with nomenclature that you don't understand, like bark, bite, and this and that. And they help if you use them correctly. But back in the day, the old school, let's just say a compressor, for instance, it had 2 or 3 or maybe 4 knobs, and that was it. And once you pretty much had it set the way you like, you never really changed it. You know, you just gain up the mic or gain down the mic, and everything down the chain just worked. So I think that digital versus analog, when it comes to the plugins, is you can just get in the weeds. And I've got another video about that, like, do you have too many plugins? I'll put a link to that down in the description if you want to check that out. It just goes where I talk about like all the choices you have, and I go in a little bit more depth into that. But I'm getting long-winded, and I want to end this with a story, so stick with me here until the end. I used to be in a band called Dogwood years and years ago in the 90s. I was temporarily in the band. Now, I had recorded them as an audio engineer several times, all on ADATs, but we had 3 or 4 machines, so it was 24 or 32 tracks, you know, max. There had come a time where their drummer left, and so I kind of stepped in to play the drums, and we were going to record an album. It was an independent album. Now, at the time of this album, I worked at a studio in San Diego called Golden Track Studio. And they had ADATs, but they also had a 2-inch tape machine. So I convinced the band, hey, guys, we got to record analog. It's going to sound so much better. You know, the ADATs just don't do the trick. Now, at this point in my career, I really was just getting into learning more about compressors. Even though I worked at 2 different studios by this time, the first studio I worked at, it was just an analog console and a couple reverb units and some ADATs. I mean, it was really bare bones. But it helped me kind of learn how to manipulate EQ really well, so that was helpful. So I get to convince the band, yes, let's do 2-inch tape. And they're like, all right, okay, if you say it's gonna sound amazing. And I'm like, I'm telling you, it's gonna sound great. So we get in there, we record to 2-inch. Now, before I tell you how the album sounded, let me explain. This studio, Golden Track, had several racks full of nothing but vintage Uri compressors and DBX. We're talking 1176s, 78s, LA2A, LA3A, LA4A, DBX 160s, you know, vintage classic stuff. And other engineers who clearly knew more than I did at the time had gone in and they'd marked with like a white, you know, marker where the knob should be, kind of like, hey, this is a good setting for an 1176. Of course, now I know that, but I didn't know. I didn't know which way was fast, which way was slow. So I just trusted wherever these settings were. And I mixed the whole record, of course we tracked it, mixed the whole record through all of this gear. And to this day, minus that I didn't have the bass guitar loud enough, sorry Jason if you're watching, minus that, the album sounds great. I mean, it stands up. And it's not because I was a good engineer. Heck, I've got 20 plus years more experience under my belt now than I did then. And I've done stuff years after that project that didn't sound near as good, that was just straight into the box. So why is it that that recording sounded so good? Well, I think it goes back to that first pro and con of analog, is it's just that saturation. It just really does sound musical. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I was using this gear that was putting its mojo, if you will, onto the record, and everything sounded better for it. So that story is just to say, even a bad engineer with good gear, it'll help for sure. It won't be perfect, but a bad engineer using analog gear versus a bad engineer using digital gear, the analog is gonna sound better. Now, before you think that I'm saying gear fixes everything, I'm not. If you've seen any videos on my channel, you know that that's not how I think. A good engineer can make bad gear sound good, okay, or crappy gear, whatever word you wanna put on it, but the point of this video is to talk about the difference between analog and digital, and I really feel like if you're missing something, if you feel like things don't have life and don't have the energy, rather than going and trying another plugin or something digital, try something analog. Maybe try a nice mic pre or a better compressor that you use just for your lead vocal. Maybe rent something. Find a company that rents and try it and go, oh wow, this is such a difference, you know? And if not, that's cool, man. Don't do anything. Don't change what you're doing. But I just wanted to challenge you to say, if you haven't tried analog, I think that you should, because there's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of albums that were done pure analog. And to this day, they stand up. Not only do they stand up, but they stand out as just killer sounding records. All right, guys, that's all I wanted to discuss. I hope that it was intriguing. Listen, leave a comment below. Let me know if you've got any analog experience or if you're only digital. Let me know, what is your favorite piece of analog gear? I'd love to find out. All right, guys, I'll see you on the next video. If you like this video, then click that like button, I appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel and help support Sidoti Sound. And click that bell if you want to be notified when I release new videos. And of course, you can find me on all sorts of social media, so be sure to check that out. If you'd like to work with me on an upcoming project, then make sure to visit SidotiSound.com for more information. All right, guys, thanks a lot.